and attitudes of people in relation to this inherent capacity for prey on others without clear reasons. Since all action is purposeful, goal-driven, and conceptualized by modus operandi, the dark psychology indicates that the closer a person becomes to the black hole of pure evil, the less likely a motive he or she is. It explores violence, disorder, and cybercriminality. In the next century, eye predators and their acts of robbery, violence, and abuse will become, if not destroyed, a global phenomenon and societal epidemic. Eye predators involve cyberstalkers, cyberbullies, cyber terrorists, cyber criminals, online sex offenders, and political or religious cyber war fanatics. Just as dark psychology considers all criminal and deviant behavior a continuum of seriousness and purposeful intent, the eye predator theory fits the same structure but includes violence, attack, and victimization using IT. Eye predator description is as follows: an individual, community, or nation that directly or indirectly participates in the use of information technology, abuse, intimidation, harassment, robbery, or frustration of others. These fantasies urge for control, punishment, religious fanaticism, political reprisal, mental illness, perceptive distortion, peer recognition, and personal and financial gain are the driving force of eye predators. Eye predators may be of any age or gender and not related to economic status, race, religion, or national patrimony. Eye predator is a global term used to distinguish people who are engaged in criminal, oppressive, deviant, or harmful IT behavior. The idea that offenders, deviants, and physically disturbed are modern psychopathological classifications of humanity is fundamental to the construction. Whether the perpetrator is a cyber speaker, cyber harmer, cyber criminal, online sexual predator, internet troll, cyber terrorist, cyber bully, consumer or distributor online, or internet defamation or nasty online disappointment, they fall into eye predator's reach. The three parameters used to describe an eye predator include a consciousness of harming others through IT, directly or indirectly, use of IT for receiving, sharing, and providing harmful information, a general definition of cyber stealth used for engaging, detecting, tracking, harassing, and targeting illegal or diverging activities. In comparison to human predators before the information age, predators depend on the vast array of advantages of IT. Other supports include the exchange of information over long distances, the fast exchange of information, and the seemingly limitless access to available data. Intentionally, eye predators typically deceive others using IT, known as cyberspace, in the abstract and artificial electronic universe. As the internet inevitably offers anonymity to all ICT users, eye predators purposefully develop online profiles and diversionary tactics to remain unrecognized and untraceable if they want. Eye predators' cyber stealth, a subtenet, is a secret method by which eye predators attempt to establish and maintain completed anonymity while they engage in ICT activities to plot their next attack, to investigate revolutionary surveillance techniques, or to study the next target's social profiles. Alongside the cyber safety, the term is the eye predator victim intuition, IVI. An eye predator's IVI is its ability to sense psychological and offline vulnerabilities, technical shortcomings, and the effectiveness of a cyber attack with limited repercussions. The arsonist is an individual with an obsessive concern about the setting of fire. These individuals often have a history of growth, full of sexual and physical abuse. The propensity to be alone, have few friends, and are fascinated by fire is typical among serial arsonists. Serial firefighters are extremely ritualistic, and their methodologies for fire setting tend to show patterned behavior. Concerned by fire, arsonists often fantasize and dream about how to structure their episodes. After the goal has been set, some experience arousal while watching. The serial arsonist is proud of his work, given his obsessive and ritualistic habits. Necrophilia, the same type of disordered individual, are all characterized by theatrophobia, necrophilia, and necrology. There are people who have an attraction to bodies. They exist. The American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual on Mental Disorders classifies necrophilia as paraphilia. Paraphilia is a psychological term used to describe the excitement of a person and anxiety for things, circumstances, or individuals that are not part of the stimulation of a norm and can cause a person's discomfort or serious problems. A paraphilia of necrophile is, therefore, aroused by an object, a deceased person. Experts who have compiled these profiles suggest that they have tremendous difficulty in being acquainted with others. Intimacy with the deceased felt comfortable and secure for these people rather than those with living people. They reveal a clear sense of control in interviews of the perceived power. A serial killer is a true human murderer, usually defined as someone who murders 3 or more people for 30 days or more. Interviews with most serial killers have shown that the time between assassination cools. The serial killer cooling off phase is a subjective cycle of refractory, which temporarily provides us with the urge to inflict pain. Criminal specialists in psychology have concluded that their motive to kill is the pursuit of a psychological gratification obtained only by brutality. Following their assassination, these people feel a sense of freedom combined with selfish strength. The encounter gives them such pleasure that they once again feel the sensation of release and gratification. The word serial killings implies a sequence of 3 or more murders, one of which has common characteristics in the U.S., implying a reasonable chance of the murders of the same actors. FBI assault, humiliation, and torture also occur during their killings. Experts at the FBI have described other cases, as well as frustration, anger, publicity, thrill, and financial gain. Serial killers also show similar trends in selecting victims, picking their targets, and disposal methods. Criminal analysts specializing in the behavioral analysis have a history of critical mental, behavioral, and social dysfunction in committed serial killers. Although not absolute, serial killers appear to be lonely and have trouble in practical relations. The above 4 examples of offenders and groups of offenders who commit aggressive or violent odd acts share the common connection with warped worldviews with profound psychological deficits. Such extreme psychological or personality mechanisms, which can metastasize their entire existence, defy explanation. What about these human predators? How do they work and socialize in their daily lives? These brief profiles explore the bleak nature of the human condition. While having mild to severe psychopathologies, they are all perceptual, isolated individuals with deep-seated powers that govern their decision-making ability. The serial arsonist cannot attack or be content with being a human predator, just like the serial murderer, but he feels pleasure and elation from the burn. Besides happiness, he feels a sense of satisfaction from the destruction he created. His fire episodes are extremely dangerous as they could injure others, but his mode of operation is not the purpose of inflicting pain or bodily harm. The real payoff for the serial arsonist is its sense of pride and warped view of a brilliant genius. At times, his perverted sense of success contributes to arousal. The action of the arsonist is reprehensible, immoral, and dangerous, but does not usually involve intentional killing. We linger in an underworld of madness. Although the necrophile doesn't cause pain or victimize people, it's extremely weird and lacks any valid reasoning. The need for perceived dominance of the necrophile is so pervasive that he eventually develops an attraction to a body. Imagine what the feeling ought to be, with a lifeless body that lacks warmth and expression. Many people long for closeness, but this necrophile doesn't need it. It is motivated by the reality of total disconnection. His mind enters a dark place. The serial killer is one of the dark side's most despotic characters. The serial assassin is also a subject of mystery in films, courts, and news coverage. The nature of this element of deviant horror reflects part of the human mind that only the serial murderer himself can feel. Just as an alcoholic wants his next drink, or an opiate addiction wants his next cure, the serial killer becomes addicted to killing. When his crime is carried out, the serial murderer talks with gratitude and a strong sense of release. In comparison to the necrophilic or serial arsonist, survival is the only endeavor of the mass murderer. Excitement from torturing their victims is a common theme for many of these assailants. Although a popular subject, other drives are equally disturbing and cause their victims to be tortured. Those four examples demonstrate the extent to which people experience strength, enjoyments, or achievement of goals. All mentioned criminal profiles include assailants feeling satisfied with their violence and/or odd acts. In addition, these examples are merely simple profiles of four sections of the population of men and women who are involved in criminal, abusive, or deviant practices. The extent to which people go for sexual pleasure, perceived power, or financial gain is vast and comprehensive. Until scientific advancement and society's ability to understand deviant human behavior, such confusion was caused by monsters. Unable to understand how people could commit these crimes, the only logical explanation was other entities. Instead, the early cultures created legends and tales of supernatural things instead of fearing their neighbors. Werewolves, vampires, and ghouls stalked their victims during the night. While contemporary society considers itself advanced in understanding the human potential for violent and abominable behavior, it remains elusive to learn how to minimize and/or avoid strange and deadly actions committed by humans. Our species is the only community of living organisms that take part in anti-survival behavior. This book is both a study of violent and deviant behavior. This facet of the human condition exists in all cultures, communities, and people who live within them. The best known kind of people have this evil world, but they never deal with it and have a lower rate of violent thoughts and sentiments. Dark psychology is a study of the human condition because it refers to the thoughts, emotions, and beliefs of the individuals that are linked to this inherent propensity to prey on others without clear reasons. Like all behavior, target focus, and conceptualization by modus operandi, dark psychology implies the notion that the closer a person comes to the black hole of pure bad, the lower the possibility that he or she has a motivating intent. While this author believes that the ultimate evil has never been reached, dark psychology claims that there are some who come close. Like dark psychology can be ignored in its latent form because of its capacity for misinterpretation, like aberrant psychopathy. History is full of examples of the latent propensity to manifest itself as aggressive, destructive behavior. The psychopath describes contemporary medicine and psychology as a predator free of guilt. Dark psychology presents a continuum of severity, ranging from thinking and feeling of violence to extreme violence without rational motive or purpose. The seriousness of this is not considered less or more abominable by victimization actions, but rather represents a certain degree of humanity. Both were extreme and hideous psychopaths in their acts. The difference is that Dahmer perpetrated his atrocious murders on top of his illusory need for companionship, as Ted Bundy killed and caused pain by psychopathic madness. Dark psychology believes that everyone has a violent potential. In all humans, this potential is inherent, and various inner and outer variables increase the likelihood that the potential is unpredictable. These activities are manipulative and can sometimes function without a purpose. Dark psychology believes that human predator-prey dynamics are skewed and that all motives are lost, assumed to be unconscious as a living organism on the earth. Dark psychology is just a human phenomenon, and no other living creature shares it. Violence and chaos can occur in other living organisms, but mankind is the only animal that can do so purposely. An awareness of the root causes and mechanisms of dark psychology will allow society to recognize, treat, and ultimately minimize the risk associated with its influence. Understanding the principles of dark psychology works in two ways. When we all recognize this capacity for evil, those with this information will reduce the possibility of its eruption. Second, recognizing the concepts of dark psychology is in line with our original evolutionary purpose in the battle to live. Psychopathy is typically a personality disorder marked by chronic antisocial behavior, diminished empathy and guilt, and audacious, disinhibited, and selfish characteristics. It is sometimes known as a synonym for sociopathy. Throughout history, various interpretations of psychopathy are only partly compatible and sometimes conflicting. The original diagnostic criteria in the DSM, Diagnosis and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, for antisocial personality reactions and disturbances, as was the case with American psychologist George E. Partridge. The DSM and the International Category of Doses, ICDs, eventually established the diagnosis of ASPD and DIS. The development of ASPD and DPD was based on the fact that many of the typical characteristics of psychopathy could not be objectively assessed. Although a diagnosis called psychopathy is not approved for any medical or psychological institution, tests of psychopathic traits are commonly used in criminal justice in some countries and may have important effects on individuals. Psychopathy is an important field of research, and the term is also used in fictional portrayals by the general public, the popular press, and although the term is often used in general use together with crazy, insane, and mentally ill, the disorder varies categorically. There are several types of psychopathy. The different definitions of psychopathy underline to various degrees three measurable features. Analyses on the applicability to this model of assessing methods such as the psychopathy checklist, PCL, and the psychopathic personality inventory, PPI, have been carried out. Daringness, low fear-like stress tolerance, unfamiliarity and danger toleration, and high self-confidence, and social dependence. The PCL measures this relatively poorly, particularly through facet or factor 1. Fearless supremacy, close to PPI. It can lead to variations in the amygdala and other fear-related neurological systems. Disinhibition, weak impulse control, including preparation and foresight issues, loss of effects and urgency controls, immediate gratification demands, and poor conduct constraints. Similar to PCL factor 2 and PPI antisocialist impulsive, it can lead to deficiencies in frontal lobe systems involved in such monitoring. Significance, lack of empathy and strong relations with others, contempt of close ties, use of violence to obtain empowerment, bullying tendencies, defiance of authority, and fear to kill them. The PCL in general, but in particular, some elements of factor 1 are related to this. For PPI, however, elements of subscales are also included in the impulsive antisocialist. Measurement. A distinct category or taxon may underline PCL psychopathy, which can be measured and evaluated. This was observed only for the behavioral factor 2 products. Child issue behaviors identified. Adult criminal behavior did not support a taxon. Using PCL and try to rule out other experimental or statistical problems which could have provided previously different results. They again find that the measures of psychopathy do not seem to classify a discrete type, a taxon. We say that while an arbitrary disruption of the markers may be used for legal or other practical purposes, there is no strong empirical proof that certain people have the objective distinction mark as psychopaths. In other words, a psychopath could be defined as, more accurately, someone who was relatively psychopathic. Personality dimensions. Psychopathy was also related to extremely psychotic, psychological dimension that relates to the extreme, violent, or hostile patterns. Aspects of psychopathy are lack of socialization and obligation, impulsiveness, feelings, sometimes, and hostility. Criticism of current conceptions. The current conceptions of psychopathy have been underlying disorders and criticized for being poorly conceptualized, highly subjective, and encompassing a wide variety of underlying disorders. The three personality traits are known together as psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism, which have certain attributes like the callous, manipulative, interpersonal cycle. This applies to these features with sadism. The latest concepts of psychopathy were criticized for being poorly conceptualized, highly subjective, and covering a wide range of psychological disorders. Signs and symptoms. Psychopathy reflects pervasive self-serving, deceptive, and disregard-less attitudes, frequently associated with violent crime, violence, and crime. In those with the condition, mental impairments among processes related to cognition and affect have been identified, particularly socially dependent mental processes. Developmentally, psychopathy signs have been found in young children with a behavioral disorder, which indicates that at least a partial constitutional element affects their development. Criminality. The average PCL manual score was 22.1 for North American prisoner samples, and 20.5% scored 30 or higher for basic interrelationships. A study of prisoner samples outside of North America showed an average value of 17.5, slightly lower. Studies have found that psychopathy levels are associated with frequent prison, higher security detention, administrative violations, and substance abuse. In meta-analyses, psychopathy, as measured with PCL in clinical settings, indicates small to moderate sizes of institutional behavior, post-release crime, or post-release violent crime, having similar results. Similar results for adult offenders, forensic medical samples, neighborhood examples, and young people are given in individual studies. PCL is less likely to predict reinfraction. This small to moderate impact tends to be primarily due to the large-scale things measuring impulsive behavior in past criminal records that are well-known but extremely common threats. Aspects of the core personality are often considered highly psychopathic and typically have little or no statistical relation to crime. For example, the PCL factor 1 and the fearless dominance of PPI include violent crime, have smaller or no connection to a crime. Factor 2 and the PPIs enhancing antisociality are more closely associated with violence. Factor 2 has a similar strength to the PCL as a whole. The antisocial side of PCL tends to prevent future aggression following monitoring of past criminal activity, which, along with PPI findings that do not include past criminal behavior, indicates that driving habits are independent risk factors. Thus, the definition of psychopathy is weak if it is used as a general crime theory. Violence. Studies of aggression have shown a strong correlation between psychopathy levels and abuse. The PCL underlines very predictive characteristics of violent behavior. However, scholars have recognized that psychopathy is not associated with aggression and is distinct. Psychopathy has been suggested to be correlated with instrumental, also known as violent, constructive, or cold-blood aggressive type of aggression, marked by reduced emotion and committed for a different purpose from but encouraged by damage. Research by 2002 murderers show that the killings of homicidal offenders with psychopathy were almost always 93.3% primarily instrumental, slightly more than the 48.4% proportion of those committed by non-psychopathic homicidal offenders. The instrumentality of murder also correlated with this report. Contrary to the equation of cold blood and cool heart, some components of the murders committed by psychopathic criminals were emotional reactivity. On average, one study found more serious offenses by non-psychopathic criminals than by psychopathic offenders, i.e., more murders than armed robbery and property crimes. And another study found that the effective facet of the PCL prediction decreased offense severity. Research on domestic violence offenders indicates that abusers have high psychotic levels, and the incidence is estimated to be around 15 to 30%. In addition, the Domestic Violence Commission is related to Factor 1 of the PCL, which defines the emotional shortcomings and the callous and exploitation interpersonal style of psychopathy. The incidence of psychopathy among domestic abusers indicates that the core properties of psychopathy, such as callousness, remorselessness, and lack of close interpersonal relationships, predispose psychopaths to household abuses and indicate that domestic abuse committed by such persons is unfortunate, i.e., instrumentally aggressive rather than a case of abuse. Many physicians say that assessing the psychopathic model does not necessarily add value to an evaluation of the risk of violence. A major systematic review and meta-regression show that the PCL performed the least of 9 instruments to prevent violence. However, studies by writers or translators of measures for predicting crime, including the PCL, have, on average, provided more positive results than those by more independent researchers. There are several more risk assessment instruments that could forecast additional crime with comparable accuracy to the PCL, and some of them are significantly easier, quicker, and less expensive to handle. This can even be done by a machine automatically based on data like average, age, sex, number of convictions, and age of first conviction. Some such tests will also define behavior adjustments and objectives, identify rapid improvements that can lead to a short-term management, recognize more complex forms of violence at risk, and also identify different probabilities of crime for particular sores. Nevertheless, due to its pioneering role and a large amount of work being done using it, PCL may continue to be popular for risk assessment. Sexual abuse. Psychopathy has been correlated with sexual crime commission, and some scholars claim that it is linked to a selective attitude to violent sexual behavior. A 2011 report on conditional releases of Canadian male federal prisoners showed that psychopathy is linked to more violent and non-violent offenses, but not to more sexual crimes. For childhood molesters, psychoanalysis is correlated with a higher number of offenses. In considering the possible reunification of certain offenders with non-injury patients in children, it was noted that sex offenders with a substantial history of crime should be tested on the PCL, and if they scored 18 or above, they should be disqualified from consideration of any placement in a home with children in any circumstances. There is a growing concern, however, that PCL scores among different examiners, including in the evaluation of sex offenders, are too inconsistent. Other violent, organized crimes, economic crime, and war crimes have been related to the likelihood of psychopathy. Terrorists are often viewed as psychopathic and parallel with traits, including antisocial violence, a greedy view of the world that precludes others from taking good care of themselves, a lack of guilt or fault, and blame for externalization that can be drawn. But John Horgan, the author of The Psychology of Terrorism, argues that the similarities should then be made more broadly. For instance, to the military. The coordinated terrorist activity also includes the degree to which organization, loyalty, and ideological fanaticism surrender themselves for an ideological cause. Features such as self-centered personality, unreliability, weak behavioral controls, and unusual behaviors can hinder or prevent psychopathic individuals from engaging in organic terrorism. A small number of individuals dealing with the condition may be socially successful, communicating their antisocial behavior through more secret mechanisms such as social coercion or white-collar crime. Sometimes, these people are considered effective psychopaths and may not always be typical of conventional antisocial behavior. The dark side, psychology of insane psychology, has tried, in recent years, to raise a human spirit in many popular psychological terms like positive psychology, or numerous books published to tell the masses how to conduct successful life, talking about parachute, 10 steps to something, the admired how-to titles, and many more. Most of them are nothing but erroneous pop psychology or a fad of the moment. Could life be as simple as reading the right book and following these basic concepts, and it will all be okay for you and me? This paper is special. We shall discuss the evil side of the human mind, that part which sees disengagement, destruction, and vile acts in the daily psyche of a man that occurs in us everywhere from time to time, that part which finds pleasure, joy, and enjoyment in the dysfunctional part of our life. How can society navigate its dark side? The insane word refers to those who are opposed to social norms in society. Let's explore how the dark side of psychological thought and action can be recognized. You need to know what's normal and what's abnormal behavior. Our first indicator is social standards. This means that what is considered a normal everyday activity in any culture is met by a set of circumstances. For instance, hitting someone violently in Western cultures is considered a criminal act and repulsive to a peaceful society. However, if a person perceives social permits, such as a soldier in a war, a police officer in the apprenticeship of a dangerous criminal, a citizen protecting his family from a serious threat to another person, you might condone violence. These double standards can, in many ways, be misunderstood. The war crime soldier likes genocide. The policeman who uses violence to threaten a witness during interviews, or the individual who, in some way, violates the rights of another person to benefit his role. The second is a moral measure. In society, how do you decide what's right and wrong? Who has the power to decide such rights? Do the laws obey moral conviction, or do they protect the weak from the strong or the rich from the poor? Most societies accept that killing another human is contrary to a moral code. It is quite simply wrong to kill and should be punished by an act of equal severity by society, which promotes the moral law that this lawmaker imposes on the masses. In many cultures, this has been a moral code of conduct, such as the 10 Christian religious commandments and other such codes found from Buddhism to the Muslim Quran. Confidence in God's reward and punishment is expressed in the legal language and rule of every civilized nation. Why do people readily deviate from the morality, laws, and religious guidelines, allowing all of us to live in a peaceful society, governed by accepted standards of conduct, which promotes the person at risk, harm, and abuse? The third area of conduct is that the English do not place in law or religious beliefs, but rather the everyday actions they call manners or political. The conduct of manner of acting conforms to the actions of superior member of the society who knows how to behave in the company of others, to the standards considered the mark of advanced civilization. Sometimes this can be seen on the etiquette of a table manner, or a man who opens a woman's door to encourage her to recognize first the duty of men to protect and defend women. In some cultures today, women's rights have cast doubt on women's manners as sexist and thereby undermining the dignity of women. Nevertheless, ways are considered as the mark of being well known at the top of society, whether it be traditional English or Japanese tea ceremony. Despite having established societies with various ways of measuring actions by statute, morality, or social norms, human beings often maintain a wide range of measuring actions by statute, dysfunctions, which often affect and manipulate others. So the predator of such conduct looks beyond legislation, moral codes, and the etiquette of the remainder of society. Sometimes, we all know that the feeling of guilt that we violate certain laws that we find important to a well-ordered society. However, there are others who will believe abuse, destruction, and death against others are nothing more than their right to live without these laws and the freedom to live a life that is defined by nothing else than what they want. The dark side. What is the guy who kicks a dog because the culture that believes his life frustrates him? What are the thoughts when the dog cries and howls in pain and fear? Why does he smile and want to hurt the dog and painfully see an animal? The spectator is shocked by his actions and sympathizes for the indefensible dog for whom this man tried to deal cruelly and without remorse. Who is this man? Why, he's all of us occasionally. We all lose our sense of internal equilibrium and critical thought as we catch the unfairness of or lack of chance in our lives. A sense of control over his ability to inflict suffering and the joy to feel superior to other children, whom he finds unable to take what they want, and his staff and servants end up with it. This superior hierarchical thought leads to a lack of remorse or consideration towards the others as fools who embrace their kind of dominance as leaders and legislators. This example is also an insight into behavior, which violates our three indicators of social standards: amoral, threatening a defenseless animal; socially acceptable conduct. While everyone else may lose his or her temper and kick his or her dog, most of them will feel tormented and remorseful. However, here you meet people who feel no guilt, no arrogance, and consider themselves to be exempt from the legislation with which they do not agree. Fox hunting was a cruel sport in England, mostly performed by smart, professional, rich men and women. However, these same people asserted that a right to kill and destroy a lifeless animal only for a good time, as they saw their hounds killed and a fox devoured. Although the majority of the English people have voted to ban this sport on several occasions, it has taken several years to get this implemented. Fox hunting is now an illegal activity, but these same individuals are still in violation of the law and shooting for non-national legislation under local regulations. However, they pretend to be superior parts of society, and therefore, above all, the moral concerns of the common masses every day. The surprising thing about England is that these people are parliamentarians, police, judges, and others in England who have power over aspects of society like property owners, land granted by robbing the rightful land of the poor in the past, often with royal approval in the past. In other words, individuals themselves that should set the example of society are the same ones who flaunt the rules and behavior that is socially acceptable. we have to look at the criminal in another example. Criminals are often regarded as society's rejections since they come from faulty backgrounds, disadvantaged families, and poor parental education. But in culture, corporate criminal activities like mistreatment of pension funds, inventories, and stocks of insider trading and corruption of assets and property by CEOs and government officials are often the most harmful to the public. This so-called white-collar crime is often undetected and is most difficult to prosecute. Criminals are more visible to the public every day as their actions contribute to local misery and make the media scream for action by the police and civil authorities. Most laws, therefore, deal with visual crime, which is easy to understand. Interactive crime punishment is also transparent in our courts and the media every day. How do you see the difference between the so-called victims' crime of white-collar criminals who see no direct victims or the killer who murders and mutilates those who resist his will to take from society everything he desires and the suffering that they leave behind? So, what does psychology suggest about those deviants who do not regard their acts as a concern for themselves or feel that others who do not control their lives are weak and thus deserve to be victims of those who are cleverer, stronger, or more powerful? Often, the media cries out for the passive masses who accept the status quo and would condemn the local person who has taken the law into their own hands, perhaps to punish any wrongdoing against him or his families. The first area in which psychology describes the motives behind other people's dark behavior is that it is a developmental environment where the dog kicker has not been adequately treated or cared for. They are exposed to violence, sexual abuse, or lack of social education in their formative years. These transgressors were victims of bullying in the classrooms, which means that people in society that are poorer than themselves have to contend with their anger. The question we must raise here is why most victims tend to be law-abiding citizens, and only a few become criminals who are murdered and mutilated for developmental reasons. Many scientists want to point to a genetic factor in behavior at this stage. For some time now, this old chestnut has been around. In violent criminals, there is evidence that they frequently have a supplementary Y chromosome, men, that gives them a high degree of testosterone that contributes to aggressive bursts into stressful circumstances where anxiety and fear are the answer to what they need. However, it is statistically negligible as a proportion of violent criminals, although this may be higher in the general prison population. All genetic research so far has led to genetic factors speculation, but no clear proof supporting the claims. The evidence cited most often is that from twin studies of twins separated at birth, identical actions and results have a high incidence. However, this evidence is weak for genetic determinism and strong for developmental conditions as a proportion of twins born and studied. And the reason is twins that undergo environments that appear to be more shocking if they turn out differently. So, what makes some people socially acceptable behavior, some who meet all society's demands, if we exclude developmental results and genetic predispositions? This is the position that makes it difficult for psychology to see a positive view or a deterministic way of the world. And perhaps it is actually that normal human behavior is to be cruel, deceitful, violent, and tends to criminal behavior in a wide range of circumstances. These morals are a luxury of a settled society in which all are economically equal, as well as caste or class. The survivalist psychology There are those, especially in the USA, who see the end of a society as a real opportunity if they support nuclear destruction, now more likely biowar, or the collapse of capitalism, leading to social chaos and civil conflict. Such individuals are often called survivors. They store weapons for the uncontrollable mobs that would overrun the country in the event of a civil collapse, and food supplies for the likelihood of economic crash shortages. In 2009, several survivors in the USA would argue that they have had a good case. Survivors believe that they have a constitutional right to defend themselves and their families in the event of a societal breakdown and a lack of protective legislation. Such organizations also dispute existing laws imposed by federal authorities like the FBI. The mentality of the survivor is therefore seen, on the one hand, as being in conflict with society, and on the other, as a real attempt to control one's destiny from future catastrophes. After all, only on this assumption can insurance companies thrive, and unfortunately, they are the first not to survive an economic collapse of capitalism as a failure of many banks around the world in 2008 and 2009. Today, the most popular movies in our box office are disaster movies, where social breakdown of civilization is triggered by earthquakes, radiation, biowarfare, alien invasion, and other disasters. The protagonists of these films are always the resourceful survivors who, by violence, protect their children against all men. How is the public appealing to these people when heroes and actual survivors are vilified as public enemies of the status quo? Judging from the popularity of these films, ordinary people understand that the fall of civilization may or may not occur. So they regard these films as kind of hope for another future and could emerge from the collapse of their daily life. Psychology as evolution. In human history, everyone started as survivors, as hunter-gatherers, wander the country to find food and warmth easily accessible. We see these communities settling in over time into agricultural settlements, establishing laws, regulations, leadership, and a moral code. As these existing communities grow and develop, they create art, music, and religion to compensate for a restricted life within the constraints of their society. Land and property became insignificant from these beginnings. The ownership of goods and chattels is necessary for production. With passage of time, these settlements became towns, cities, and ultimately countries through borders. Survival is now the group, not the entity as human instincts have been from the beginning of time. However, all these structures eventually disappear and crumble away. Some for unknown reasons, like the Mayan and other civilizations in South America. The greatest failure is when they become nations that govern people, the poor, with a version of their laws and religions. However, one thing that history teaches us all is that for all sorts of causes, cultures collapse. Greek, Roman, ancient world Egyptian, and modern world British, French, German, and Japanese empires. They had one thing in common that they did not foresee: their death. Today, the European and American worlds could not imagine the collapse of the EEC or the United States, but these new modern empires have a capitalism heel of their Achilles. While Karl Marx saw the evil of capitalism and its ultimate failure, he could not have seen the modern world's hold on such a degree that oil and gas wars ruled the 21st century. However, Marx would still laugh gleefully at the '09 collapse of the planet's financial structures based on greed and debt. Most failures lead to mismanagement. However, it was, in reality, a loss of trust in the financial system by ordinary people who led to earnings buried and the inability to service debt paralyzed by high interest rates and low investment returns. When people are nervous, they go to survival mode. They first take care of themselves. Social standards, laws, and morals are, in fact, non-normal. And society often forces group behavior based on what the strong want of the powerless. This is our standard. And what society is trying to do is to control the wild beasts of each individual by teaching them early on to obey the laws, rules, and morals of the controlling community, typically the wealthy, which rule over our governments and institutions. So, should we condemn those who feel that society is not giving them a fair deal? That, in fact, they should do what they need to survive in an environment that is often hostile, where privilege depends on the school, family, or wealth? Does psychology itself have to leave the cabinet, admitting that normal human behavior is against rigid societies and rules? People resent society, but they feel helpless in trying to live with the sheep because they are powerless against those who have influence over lawmaking and morality. Is it any wonder then sometimes that a lonely person takes into his own hands to change society or his environment to live freer, self-controllable life away from the rigors of societies that, as we saw, are finally broken down and reinvented in such new, rich, and powerful take control once again? In the last century, we saw China go from a deported empire to a military regime controlled by the rich and powerful to become a communist stare of 1950s, in which Marxism would establish a fair life for all of us. And eventually today, China is a capitalist, socialist state based on a ruling party, which determines the lives of the powerless people and struggles against it. Will another revolution happen in China? At present, given the chaos in many parts of China, where minorities are forced to comply with central rule, it seems unlikely. Unable to see these empires, their downfall. How does psychology deal with the question of human actions as a basic mechanism for survival, which is that human beings are naturally violent, cruel, and dominate weaker people? Within mental hospitals, psychiatry is often perceived to be the agents of social control. So you should be dedicated and regulated to the health and good of everybody when you disagree with the system and those laws. On the other hand, psychology is seen as a therapeutic dimension of mental health, where we support those who have an alignment with society to find their place and to fit in with what is considered abnormal behavior for that group. What is a response for those who revolt against their society in which they live and want another way of life without the intervention of the powerful and free to live a life which suits them? Or are we waiting until films come true for the disaster awaiting everyone and a return to a dog-eat-dog? The way that we manipulate others and communicate with them in order to get what we want out of them is usually born into us to some capacity. The way that we tend to form relationships and maintain them is dictated in a large part by our home life. In other words, the way we can manipulate others is determined by the way that we manipulate our children. For example, if you were a child who grew up with very strict parents or other guardians in your life, which enforced a lot of strict rules, you probably had one of two reactions to those rules. You either grew into a very submissive person, likely afraid of authority in some way, or you found ways to bypass override or simply get around the rules set by those authority figures. If you grew into a more submissive person, it might be much harder for you now to use intimidation or fear tactics against others, because you were so often the victim of similar tactics. However, if you were a child who grew up to be more authoritative or dominant socially, those kind of tactics probably come much more naturally to you because you grew up using them. Similarly, those who grew up with very little authority in their childhood are much more likely to grow up into a person who might not be used to the fear tactics or intimidation that might be used on you by others as an adult. If you aren't used to these tactics, either as the giver or the receiver of their effects, you're automatically much less equipped to deal with them when you're an adult. If you had a figure in your life from a young age who instilled a fear of authority in you, you're more equipped when you're older to deal with peers or other people around you who might use those very same or similar techniques in order to try and manipulate you. One of the most relevant tactics that family members or friends will use in order to keep you in line or try to make sure you don't stray from norms within the group or family unit is one that you'll likely use in the business world or in your relationships as an adult. Utilizing the pack mentality and its strong effects, especially against women and children, can be a very strong weapon of your influence for whenever you're trying to intimidate someone into doing something or making a certain decision. The pack mentality banks on the very strong need for humans to feel needed, as though they belong in a group. If they feel isolated from that group or as though they've been shunned from it, they will do everything in their power to put themselves back in a position among the group so they can regain that feeling of safety and belonging. In 1943, Abraham Maslow created his theory of human motivation, which would later develop to become what we know as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This hierarchy of needs often poses 5 levels of needs that every human has to fulfill in order to survive as a normal, functioning person. The bottom level is filled by the need for basic survival. This includes food, water, and shelter. The second rung of needs is safety, involving physical safety from the elements and the ability to defend oneself from possible threats. Next comes social needs, the basic need for every human to interact with other people often enough so they don't go completely insane and cease to function on a level that is mentally healthy. This is the rung which fuels the need for us to be social and to form bonds no matter where we are. Whether we're in a family unit, a friend group, or the workplace, there will always be groups of people with similar interests who are almost always together or have a way of being together whenever possible. Humans are social animals which form bonds quickly and form cliques in order to fulfill the social needs and expand their abilities to keep themselves and their loved ones from safe potential harm. The fourth rung is of esteem, which is also a crucial rung which influences humans to reach out for any opportunity to make themselves prouder and to feel whole. The third and fourth rungs are the ones that you must take advantage of if you want to manipulate and persuade other people to your side in a conflict or simply in your everyday social life. Because humans are so strictly social, they're always looking for ways to fulfill their harsh desire to feel like a worthwhile part of the social system. This is how most workplace work in the world, as far as pack mentality goes. Once you have enough workers participating in a system where those who stick together are the most efficient, the system begins to work on its own as more and more people become aware of their strengths of the pack. The more people who join the majority, the stronger it becomes. This becomes a self-fulfilling cycle where the vast majority of individuals become stronger and places more and more social pressure on those who haven't yet joined the pack. In addition to pressures that are applied to the people who have yet to join the pack by the people who have lead it, this is how you capitalize on the fear of being left out or excluded from that group. When you influence people further in their belief that they need to join your clique or group in order to prevent either something bad from happening or the shunning from the social group as a whole, you both solidify your fear of being outsider and the social grasp that you have on that person. By becoming the alpha in that social group or pack, you ensure that all other members understand your place as well as theirs and adhere to their status. The fifth and final tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the rung of fulfillment, in which humans need some path through which they can satisfy a more spiritual need for social cohesion. You can also take advantage of this need in people along with the third and fourth rungs, but the two rungs below fulfillment will generally be the most fruitful as far as manipulation and persuasion are concerned. Generally speaking, if you can capitalize on the person's need to feel wanted and needed in a social group, you can make them constantly aware of whether or not they're currently in the pack or social majority. You're succeeding in getting them to eventually follow you in your decisions no matter what. The easier and smoother you can make this transition for people between being generally independent and being reliant on you, the easier it is for you to take advantage of how they think and how they act on those thoughts and feelings. The tighter of a hold you have on them as a person or their allegiance to you. Of course, not all people have it naturally in them to be able to conduct people in this way. It might be hard for you because become a leader of the pack in your family, friend group, or workplace. This can be remedied fairly easily. As long as you have a basic understanding of psychology and how you can manipulate people to side with you and sympathize with you, if you know how to garner both empathy and fear from people in the process of ascending social rank in the group, you already have a good shot at achieving and maintaining a leadership role in that group. There are always two main fears that you can capitalize on when you're in a position of power in a group. The fear of being alone or shunned by the majority, and the fear of being judged for not being part of that majority. These are also the two fears which will be used most against you when you end up on the receiving end of manipulation or intimidation and fear tactics. If you can know your way around these two central fears of most people and how to exploit them, you have a firm grasp on the people and an understanding of how to keep your power. The fear of being separated from a group is much more literal, and you can expand upon the power by subtly slipping the target references to bad things that could happen to them if they weren't included in the majority, or even if they decided to turn their back on the majority. In a familial unit, the promise of support comes automatically with most groups. So separating yourself by force from a possibly abusive or toxic home can be scary for someone who was raised with a fear of authority or particular anxiety when it comes to abandoning family or majority. This is why most families will raise their children with a belief that blood is thicker than water. This idiom expresses the intrinsically tight bonds that all families tend to have with their children and loved ones. Because of these bonds, families should always stick together, and if someone separates themselves from the family unit, they're betraying the family as a whole. However, the full idiom does not stop there. The entirety of the phrase is usually spoken as the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. In other words, the family which we observe and choose for ourselves will always have stronger and more genuine bonds than the family which were assigned at birth. Although blood relations are strong, it's the experiences that bind us together that forge a friendship or relationship and keep it healthy and strong. In this context, the bonds you forge with people and the way you influence them is less about the mental connections you make with them beforehand and more about the things you can find that you share now. If you can find things that you have in common with the person you're trying to manipulate and capitalize on the fact of being separated from their pack, you can keep them closer to you and the rest of the pack. And you will have had better luck making sure they stay allegiant to you and the rest of the group. However, when you're trying to show them that the best option is staying with a larger group, don't try to intimidate them or make them immediately afraid. If you jump the gun and they become afraid, or either outcome, they'll avoid you and the idea of the pack altogether. Before you try to reinforce a fear of being alone or being separated, you need to make sure they feel a strong attachment or emotional bond to you or other members of the majority which you formed. Make sure that the person you want to involve in the group has a positive connotation of the group. If they don't already know someone who they have positive feelings towards involved in the group, try to get them involved in activities with the group and introduce them to people already in the group who they're likely to get along with. Someone with a familiar lifestyle or a similar interest. This will encourage a person to spend more time with or around the group, reinforcing their positive association with it. When they have a positive understanding of the group itself, reinforce their positive connotation of you as the leader of the group, or at least someone within the group who they can trust and confide in. The feeling of a special bond through this kind of venue will encourage them to seek you and the group out for more feelings of intimacy. Humans all want to feel valued in their very own way and to feel as though their bonds with others are deeper and more unique than their bonds with others. So, indulge them. Allow them to feel as though your relationship with them and the conversation that you have with them are unique and special in their depth. Make them feel as though the group or the pack is where they belong in life. This will do a few things. It will make them feel more obliged to stay in the group for as long as you need them to. It will also encourage them to get closer and closer to the people already in the group, including you. The bonds you forge with them will maintain their strength as long as you keep validating them and their desire for that closeness and emotional intimacy. As long as you can keep up that feeling of emotional closeness with them, they'll always follow you for as long as you keep up that special connection with that person. Finally, keeping up with the emotional intimacy and making them feel special will make them feel more indebted to you emotionally, preventing them further from exiting the group. They'll stay in the group longer and will go longer without bringing up any issue with the pack or expressing any desire to leave because they don't know of any way that you or anyone else in the group has wronged them. You can further capitalize on their lack of desire to leave by making sure they understand what will happen when they eventually do leave, when the time isn't yet right for them to do so, or the timing is inconvenient for you. Humans have a very strong fear of being abandoned or being rejected by a group of people who they might find solace in. So, make sure the bond toward the group and possibly moving away from the idea of becoming part of the pack. Instead, allow for the experience to be slow and the process of joining the group to feel well paced for the person. This is another time where, in order to get the best and longest lasting results, you just have to be patient. Having faith in your own skills, the person on the receiving end of this convincing, and the strength of the pack mentality which you're already set in place should be enough to carry out your plans through the success if you took the time and the patience to set a good foundation. If you have confidence in your plans, people around you are much more likely to have confidence in you. This goes back to consider the mindset which you have in order to experience the success that you envision for yourself. You cannot have doubts about yourself or about your abilities if you want to see success using dark psychology. If you have emotional or mental blockages that are holding you back from that confidence, or using dark psychology to its fullest in order to expand your opportunities, you will only experience failure, and the techniques that you will use will likely end up backfiring on you. It's only when you have the confidence in yourself and a thorough understanding of psychology that the methods you put into place will work in your favor. There are 3 methods you can use when you speak to people who you want to persuade to your side. These methods of speech are the 3 appeals to human nature developed by Aristotle, and they form the key building blocks to successful communication and persuasion. If you're able to use these terms and their proper uses to their fullest potential, you can get anybody on your side that you otherwise might be struggling to convince on that boardroom. The reality is that we often can't convince others only based on our wit and reasoning. Often, we have to turn to some other method in order to get to the core of the person and appeal to them on an individual level. This is how people see the most success, by singling people out and understanding what they want to hear, then feeding what they want to hear right to them. This way, each party experiences emotional success, while the person presenting their ideas or asking for support gets what they need. The person is being targeted by these appeals believes that they are getting a good deal or are, in their own way, being serviced. The first of the 3 appeals is logos, the appeal to any human's sense of logic. When you're in a meeting of some kind, or in an argument, or some other scenario where you need to persuade people to your side, you might need to tap into someone's reverence of facts. When you present information to people with enough confidence and present that information as though it were fact, more people are likely to believe it as a fact without actually backing and checking reputable sources to verify the information. This is how you get people to side with you. Understand the way that people process information when it's presented in small, digestible format and comes with numbers that seem to be accurate. Unless you're in a situation where the absence of reputable fact can harm others, and you're simply in a more casual setting like a personal argument with friends or a family debate, you can present effectively any string of statistics that sounds about right and pertains to the discussion, and you're likely to be believed. The more important aspects of convincing others this way is that it is done with tone of voice with which you present the information. If you can present information with authority, you can make other people believe that what you're saying is true. This way, they're much less likely to check in on their own or ask for more reputable sources. The key to being believed by others is having confidence and a positive mindset. If you can maintain these two things, you're much less likely to be found suspicious of by others. People tend to believe logos because they might feel betrayed by emotion or are looking for facts and numbers in a scenario where emotions have failed to convince them. Logos is often the first attempt to convince others by many people, but it doesn't have to be. Many people use it as a last effect on their argument, peppering in numbers and statistics, which are actually general facts that they order to sound more apt to the situation and suitable to be in a position of authority. This is how you can use your logos to your advantage to strengthen your argument without creating a possibly more emotion-heavy argument around logic. Using facts and numbers here and there in order to make you sound stronger. If you can hammer home the importance of logic in your argument, it does not necessarily need to be an argument that calls for all numbers. The second appeal you can use in order to win people over is, for many, the strongest when a position at home or in your social or love life. Pathos. This appeal is to appeal to the heart or human condition. Pathos is an appeal that shouldn't be used exclusively in any context, but it can be used to make up the bulk of an argument. Consider commercials that show animals or children who are in terrible conditions or suffering in order to get money or patronage or support from you or to their organization. By marketing their suffering and abuse of innocent animals or people, they use pathos effectively to appeal to the human desire to help others, no matter who or where they are. Humans will always want to help others so that they can feel better about themselves, and so that they can further spread the hope of creating a happier and more unified society. Although some people participate in this idea more than others, every person on earth can be affected by an appeal to their sense of empathy or pity. You can tap into a person's sense of pathos by presenting yourself as someone who is suffering in that moment. In the case of a direct argument between yourself and a loved one, make them understand that whatever they're doing is making you feel bad or grieve. If you aren't in a direct argument and you only want to support from others, tap into their sense of general empathy and how they can make the world a better place. You can easily encourage most people to join your cause by telling them that by joining, they can transform the world into a best form with their own hands, and your help, of course. The third and final appeal to the human psyche is often confused with pathos because it often deals with people's emotions and feelings. Ethos, the appeal to ethics or a person's moral code. Although a person's moral code can be comprised to other sense of emotion or empathy, there's a distinction between the two. While you can convince a person to your side of an argument or garner their support using their sense of morality, this appeal is often the weakest in many cases because the strength of this argument is based entirely on a person's moral code and the strength by which they adhere to that moral code. For example, you might be able to garner someone's support fairly easily if they have a fairly strong sense of right and wrong. Their moral compass is stronger than the average person's. However, this appeal wouldn't work with someone who might be sitting next to the first individual if their sense of morality was fairly weak. It can be difficult to meet someone briefly and know their moral strength quickly. So the use of ethos can be used either very broadly, appealing to people on the basis of preventing harm, a broad moral understanding of most people, or with people who you know very well. While it's sometimes the weakest of the three appeals, the appeal to the sense of the morality can often be the linchpin in getting someone to trust you or getting someone's guaranteed support. It's within these tightly knit groups we can create where we find the people who will be of the most help to us while we try to expand our influence and our opportunities. That isn't at all to say that the people we persuade and use the most aren't actually valuable. They're companions, and you should treat them as such. No matter what you use your relationship and companionships for in life, the people you form these connections with will sustain you for a part of your life, as long as you have those bonds. This is why pack mentality is important, not only for the people under you in the pack, but to you as well. As the pack sustains its members, it also sustains you. The pack mentality functions in any group, but it functions best in large groups, like in the workplace. Many of these techniques will serve you best in the workplace or work environment. In the next chapter, we'll discuss ways you can use these mental and emotional techniques to manipulate and persuade your way to the top of the food chain business and at work. Your mind is a weapon. Some of the best science fiction that has ever been written has surrounded the subject of mind control and its ability to control our world. But still, it can sound like a futuristic event. However, many neuroscientists are continuing to strive forward to the creation of a digital interface specifically designed to connect to the brain, which in recent times has continued to make progress. Even though this advanced technology is still unreachable, it has made plenty of headway where we could see mind control gadgets popping up everywhere in the near future. Currently, a technology known as brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, has only been in the development stage for individuals who have fallen victim to injuries, which are debilitating, such as being paralyzed. A great example of this is a paraplegic by the name of Dennis DeGray. Neuroscientists at Stanford University assisted DeGray in creating a major breakthrough in a typing world record involving mind control. DeGray's success partially stems from the assistance of Jamie Henderson. Henderson, who is a neurosurgeon at Stanford, successfully implanted 2 electrode arrays the size of a Tic Tac into the brain of DeGray. DeGray's brain activity is then monitored by the electrode arrays, which helps in the decoding of electrical brain signals, which neurons fire deep in the brain's motor cortex. The end results achieved were beyond impressive and allow for the early steps of achieving independence to many people who are currently fully or partially paralyzed. With a lot of interest points pointed towards the ability to provide control over the environment by way of a BCI, many researchers hope that future demonstrations can be made to further technology in the future ahead. It could even be as soon as the next 5 to 10 years that we could see more of it being integrated into people's lives. Besides the research and development being constructed at Stanford, another company seems to be taking it one step further. Neuralink, founded by Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, has been dedicated in the creation of BCI that they have labeled as neural lace. To date, Neuralink has already raised close to $30 million for funding the project. Nevertheless, like anything that is connected to the internet, one has to be extremely careful and diligent in the security and safe handling of all devices so that the device's security does not become compromised. We saw this occur with the Mariah botnet practically destroyed many areas of the internet that created attacks that caused denial of service. Once a person's brain is implanted and connected to an internet device, this is when a completely new level of security issues could occur, including a possible brain jacking. Not only for security purposes, but it also could lead to many questions pertaining to ethical responsibility. For example, if a brain-controlled machine breaks the law, then who is arrested for it? Problems like this would need to require deep discussion before our future becomes a place where mind control is used for everything. However, in the short term, an interface that is a less invasive brain-computer is already in use and which have risks that are significantly lower. There are numerous who support our contemplation similar to a method for sparing mankind. Might be this is a real component that could make this work. This idea of intentionally framing gatherings to deliberately create thought structure myths is a fascinating one. Could the eventual fate of instruction be through such gatherings? A few educators and a few understudies structure a gathering. The instructors create their insight into idea structures, and the orderly understudies sign in to the idea shapes, thus ingest the information. Once more, the need vitality from feeling is to be survived. What feeling could the educators feel that would drive the contemplations without mishapping them? Possibly unlimited love for the chaperone understudies as a gathering. Perhaps even outrage at obliviousness. For the understudies to join into this cloud, the manipulator sets traps or baits into which the victim falls in and then gets exploited for selfish or nefarious gains. Indoctrination is the act of imparting someone with a set of beliefs without offering that person an opportunity for critical inquiry. Indoctrination strategies, rote training. This is an act of enforcing information into people's memory through repetitive action. For example, uttering certain mantra during prayers, or counting mala beads while praying. Affirmation. Making people say words that positively prove certain statements. This way, they are programmed to hold these statements as true. Obstruction of truth and facts. This is a deliberate action aimed at taking those being indoctrinated not to access sources of truth or facts. For example, they can be barred from reading certain books that are deemed satanic. Fear psychology is often employed, like telling people that they will have nightmares or be visited by vampire spirits in their sleep if they read such a book. Confession. Every one of us has a sinful past. We all have skeletons in our past. Things that we did and feel guilty about. One indoctrination strategy is to force people to confess. Once they confess, they lose the moral authority to stand upright before their indoctrinators. As such, they become more submissive toward indoctrination. Isolation. The main aim of isolation is to cut off someone from the influence that make indoctrination impossible or difficult to achieve. Thus, the victims are cut off from the rest of the family, society, or normal relationships. Isolation is the one form of obstruction of truth and facts, since the victims cannot get a second opinion about assertions being made by the indoctrinators. Guilt imposition. Guilt imposition is closely related to forced confession. However, in guilt imposition, a sense of guilt is postulated into the victim's mind. The victim may be unknowingly ensnared to commit a wrong, and the indoctrinator finds ways to discover it. Later on, the indoctrinator uses that act to impose guilt on the victim. This is why, in most traditions, religious, cults, political organizations, and even some civil organizations have rituals. For example, it is common for rituals to be performed prior to prayers, burials, the war, etc. Rituals enhance a person's susceptibility to a certain proposition being advanced by the indoctrinator. Induced dependency. Induced dependency is commonly applied by manipulators in a relationship where they want to gain an upper hand over their victims. For example, imperialist or colonial entities can perpetuate poverty in their target society and then pretend to be saviors of that society. They may dish out conditional aid, conditional grant, etc., with the conditions carefully crafted to increase dependency and make the victims more susceptible to exploitation. Since without this deliberate impoverishment, that particular society would not have been susceptibly poor or would not have welcomed the conditional aid and grant. This becomes an induced dependency. In marriage partners, it is common for an insecure partner to create a condition that makes the other partner dependent. For example, an insecure husband can push or trigger his wife to lose employment. Once the wife loses employment, then the insecure husband feels comfortably in control of the unemployed wife since he is the main breadwinner. The wife's lack of financial independence makes her become more susceptible to the dictates of her husband. Unsurprisingly, indoctrination takes place in most domains of our lives. It takes place in our homes, by parents, in schools, by teachers, in public life, by politicians and governments, etc. The following are some of the key characteristics of tools used for indoctrination: fear, dogmatism, fundamentalism, cognitive closure, feeling of inadequacy, perceived deprivation, sources of indoctrination. While there are some covert sources of indoctrination, the following are some of the common covert sources of indoctrination: religious institutions, schools and educational establishments, media, mainstream alternative media, social media, parents, politicians, marriage partners, brainwashing. Brainwashing refers to erasing from one's belief system the existing set of old beliefs and in its place supplanting a new set of beliefs. Brainwashing happens without someone's will. While sometimes brainwashing is subtle and voluntary, a lot of times it is violent. For example, we've had forced conversions during the Crusade period and also during the Jihad. In the forced conversion, the victims are fully aware that they are being brainwashed, but accept it as a coping mechanism to avoid greater harm, such as death. Violent brainwashing happens most in the militant or criminal organizations, where victims are trapped and have no exit option. Potential victims of violent brainwashing include prisoners, especially prisoners of war, slaves into captivity, kidnapped victims, illegal aliens. In subtle brainwashing, Often the victim voluntarily and knowingly accepts brainwashing. In this case, the perpetrator looks out for susceptible victims who are more malleable. The victims are often in a desperate situation and thus have a psychological void that desires fulfillment. The following are some of the potential victims of unknowing brainwashing. Those suffering from unknown chronic illness. Minors who have left their home to live alone are often far away. Those who have lost their jobs and are in deep despair. Those who have lost their loved ones, especially through divorce or death. Hypnotization. Hypnotization is the act of drawing a person's mind to a receptively vulnerable state that is irresistibly open to your suggestions. A hypnotized person is like a sleepwalker whose consciousness is deeply focused on the act of walking and completely isolated to signals emanating from the rest of the environment. While in that state of hypnotism, the hypnotized person cannot consciously draw references from external sources, but only from the suggestions. The person either largely or completely loses peripheral awareness. In a sense, it qualifies as mind control because it is literally causing someone to shift how they are thinking in line with what the persuader thinks is right. When you're able to master the art of persuading others, you'll be able to yield that power when it's necessary, in ways that can be beneficial to both you and those around you that seek to persuade. Of the different forms of dark psychology, this one is the least insidious. It does not hide and does not attempt to force someone into doing something. Instead, it is open and honest, advertising its purpose and seeking to encourage those around the individual to do something because they want to rather than out of coercion. The persuader wants everyone to agree with him or her, but not badly enough to force the point or coerce others. When attempting to persuade someone, there are 6 principles that should be remembered. Understanding and utilizing these can be incredibly useful when it comes to influencing other people. These 6 principles are reciprocity, consistency, social proof, likability, authority, and scarcity. Within a relationship, you may put a time limit on making a serious decision, such as choosing to move in together or give an answer to a proposal. If you are attempting to sell something, you can make it clear that the offer that is on the table at that particular moment is limited and will expire shortly. This puts the pressure on the other person to decide quickly. While putting limitations on the table, you should also make it a point to show how the other person is likely to lose out if they do not take the offer quickly. By focusing on what will be lost, the other person is more likely to act quickly simply because people do not like the idea of losing out. Another way to cause scarcity is to make something limited. Think of how restaurants will run limited time only items, such as fancy drinks or menu items. These are only available for a short period of time, and people often fall for the trick, trying to get into the limited time system just so they can say that they have. Especially today, with social media being so influential and people wanting to have everything social media ready, people are more likely to go out of their way to seek out a rare item. When coming from a psychological point of reference, manipulation is mostly about perception. How we perceive things or actions determines our laws, social formalities, and even our lives. The manipulator changes these norms with tactics. The determination of the positive or negative connotation of these actions remains subjective. Psychological manipulation is often considered devious. With the subject of dark psychology, we take into account that the manipulation practice is often exploitative at the expense of others. So, what is manipulation of the dark? Sources tell us that it is concealment, hiding in the shadows, knowing when to strike. It is also a false front, hiding true intentions. When we are talking about this level of deception, we're talking about hiding aggression. When we talk, there's a certain level of aggressive behavior that happens. A small part of manipulation is hiding that aggressive behavior so the victim sees only good nature. This is accomplished by various ways and means, one being knowledge. When we allow another to know us, we display vulnerability along with strengths. The knowledge of these personal traits can give the manipulator the ability to maneuver around without any alarms going off. The effectiveness of manipulating those strengths and vulnerabilities arrives when the practitioner of the dark knows what is vulnerable and what inspires pride. A reoccurring ideology that drives us to war takes into consideration that war is more negative than positive. We want to avoid it. The manipulation process sees the pride in all of us and plays to that pride. It is our strength. However, when used to drive an army to slaughter others, intention of our pride has been manipulated to enforce the agendas of others. There is ruthlessness when we talk about psychological manipulation. When dealing with someone rather than the pure psychopath who feels little or nothing, ruthlessness can be measured. Often, soft, ruthless behavior can sneak up on its prey and snag it before it knows of what is happening. This harm of the prey becomes less than even a momentary qualm in the mind of the manipulator. Often, the practitioners of dark psychology use aggression and fear to drive us. The less dark side still falls into the category of knowing what weakness is, and that weakness leaves the individual open to control. How the manipulator uses that control determines the severity of manipulation. There is and are positive versions of manipulating others, like convincing someone that they are not doing well and that they need to get help. We, however, are looking at the darker side of this. The manipulator uses their skills of control to get what they want, and the cost does not apply. There are many ways to move another into a place of being controlled. From the positive to the negative, psychological manipulators utilize all tactics. When positive reinforcement is used, charm is displayed. A forced smile or laughter can trigger laughter in all of us. As when we were infants, we copy what we see. When we see tears, we want them to stop. When we see a smile, we find ourselves smiling as well. The manipulator using positive reinforcement can shower money, charm, and gifts to get us to feel something. The usage of these things allows control of us on an instinctual level. We follow those who tell us what we want to hear. When the dark practitioner takes the time to work on persuasion, the victim becomes lost on the other side. It is the absence of conscience that makes persuasion dark. When we do not think about our actions and how they will influence others in a way that is not selfish, we are stepping from the light into the dark. But it will create more harm than good if you don't know how to avoid detection. A good liar is able to act natural, but he is also prepared. He knows what to say and do when people try to detect his dishonesty. A good liar is also wise about lying. He thinks, why lie when he doesn't have to? Lying takes a lot of effort. He knows that if he conserves that energy for when he really needs it, he'll be a better liar on the rare occasions when he dies. He also knows that he will earn an honest reputation and won't earn the mistrust of others. So here are some tips on how to become such a good liar that you could even fool an FBI investigator who is an expert at catching liars. Have a reason. Lying all the time is no way to become a good liar. Sure, practice makes perfect, but when you lie a lot, you run the risk of getting sloppy. You damage your honest reputation. If you are a known liar, no one will believe you. You're more likely to get caught in lies in the future if people suspect that you lie about everything. It is far better to have an honest reputation where people think that you are a good person who never lies. Then people won't have as much reason to suspect you of dishonesty. Of course, this means that you should be honest more than you are dishonest. Save the lying for when you really need to lie. Basically, only lie when you have a good reason to. Weigh each situation in your head. What would the consequences of the truth be? You might make someone unhappy with the truth, but will that unhappiness go away? Is this something that other people can get over? Or will it ruin your reputation, your friendships, and more? If you have a lot to lose by telling the truth, still consider telling the truth. People will often forgive you for the truth. Lying makes things 10 times worse. But if you absolutely cannot tell the truth, then you can consider lying. The more you need to lie, the more likely you are to pull it off. You stand to lose a lot, and you have great motivation for lying. Therefore, you will do your best to tell a convincing lie. Rehearse. Before you lie, it is best to organize your mind. Get things right so that when you tell your tale, you won't mess up. First, determine your target. Who are you lying to and why? What story will make the most sense to this person and minimize the risk of getting caught? Know who you'll be lying to in order to design the best possible lie. Second, think up a logical story. Fill in all gaps. Come up with lots of details to make your story believable. Think of questions or problems that others may bring up and come up with explanations. You may have to think fast, but don't let that get you nervous. This is a chance to be very creative. Next, practice your lie in your head so that you memorize it. That way, when you're on the spot to being interrogated, you're prepared with what to say. You won't spend as much time scrambling to make up details on the spot and creating an incoherent story that gives away your deception. Persuasion. Persuasion is perhaps one of the most innocent ways to control the mind of someone else. In a sense, it qualifies as mind control because it is literally causing someone to shift how they are thinking in line with what the persuader thinks is right. When you're able to master the art of persuading others, you'll be able to yield that power when it's necessary, in ways that can be beneficial to both you and those around you that seek to persuade. Of the different forms of dark psychology, this one is the least insidious. It does not hide and does not attempt to force someone into doing something. Instead, it is open and honest, advertising its purpose and seeking to encourage those around the individual to do something because they want to rather than out of coercion. The persuader wants everyone to agree with him or her, but not badly enough to force the point or coerce others. When attempting to persuade someone, there are 6 principles that should be remembered. Understanding and utilizing these can be incredibly useful when it comes to influencing other people. These 6 principles are reciprocity, consistency, social proof, likability, authority, and scarcity. Within a relationship, you may put a time limit on making a serious decision, such as choosing to move in together or give an answer to a proposal. If you are attempting to sell something, you can make it clear that the offer that is on the table at that particular moment is limited and will expire shortly. This puts the pressure on the other person to decide quickly. While putting limitations on the table, you should also make it a point to show how the other person is likely to lose out if they do not take the offer quickly. By focusing on what will be lost, the other person is more likely to act quickly simply because people do not like the idea of losing out. Another way to cause scarcity is to make something limited. Think of how restaurants will run limited time-only items, such as fancy drinks or menu items. These are only available for a short period of time, and people often fall for the trick, trying to get into the limited time system just so they can say that they have. Especially today, with social media being so influential and people wanting to have everything social media ready, people are more likely to go out of their way to seek out a rare item just so that they can say that they did so. Keeping this in mind can help you become a better liar. Consider how you want to please someone. Then, create a reality that would please that person. Believe in that reality. Strive to please them. This will motivate you to not only lie, but to lie well. The key to lying is to become comfortable with it. How can you do this? One way is to make yourself believe your own lie. This is the trick pathological liars use. They literally create false realities in their minds to convince themselves that they aren't lying. Then they tell their false stories with conviction, as if their stories are real. These ties into rehearsal. Rehearsing lies is essential to lying well. Machiavellianism in psychology refers to a behavioral characteristic that sees individuals as centered on their interests to manipulate, deceive, and exploit others to achieve their goals. One aspect of what is referred to as the dark triad is Machiavellianism, the other two being narcissism and psychopathy. The name comes from the famed Renaissance diplomat and philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli, whose most famous work was The King, the Prince. The famous book expressed the view that strong rulers must be tough with their subjects and enemies, and that glory and survival justify any means, even those deemed unethical and brutal. Machiavellianism became a popular term by the end of the 16th century, when the art of being disappointed was represented. But until the 1970s, when two social psychologists, Richard Christie and Florence L. Geis, created what they called the Machiavellianism scale, it was not a psychological term. This scale is still used as the principal instrument to measure Machiavellianism and is now known as the Mach 4 test. Machiavellianism is found in men to be more prevalent than in women. Nevertheless, it can happen in anybody, including babies. Dark triad, gender, and the narcissist. When women and men narcissists manifest their narcissism, they naturally have a tendency to vary. They emphasize various things. We turn various elements of their personality and life into the cornerstones of their condition. Women stress on their bodies, as in eating disorders, anorexia nervosa, and nervosa bulimia. Their physical beauty, individuality, and social and cultural femininity are flavored and abused. They protect their narky supply by means of their more traditional gender roles: homeland, babies, acceptable professional careers, their husbands, the women of, their feminine traits, their role in society, and so on. They rely on such a degree on the opinions of the people around them that they are transformed with time into ultra-sensitive seismographs of public opinion, wind barometers, and conformity guards. Narcissists cannot allow themselves to seriously alienate those who comment on their false selves. The very correct and permanent functioning of your ego depends on the goodwill and collaboration of your human environment. You'll need to stand firm against such a formidable opponent. It's time to regain your own identity. You may see your narcissistic part as a huge, powerful brute, but in fact, he or she is small, frail, and has no control over you anymore. The only power that he or she has is a power that you give them. It's time to embrace affection for yourself. You are worthy, lovable, and you are significant. It's time to get to work through your emotions. Understand it is a painful process to grieve. Let yourself feel the pain and take the time to get through all the stages. It's time we stopped hoping your narcissistic parent will adjust. At first, once you have become aware of how you have been controlled, you might be a little upset. You might feel hurt by others, grossed out that someone had so much power over you, or regretful that you didn't see things sooner. Don't let yourself feel this way. It is not your fault that you have been controlled. That is the entire point of what other people are trying to do to you. Yes, maybe you could have seen warning signs sooner or done something to protect yourself, but that is something really challenging to do. If avoiding manipulation was easier, then we likely would have wiped out manipulation from our communication by this point. Manipulation is common. Your boss, mother, or lover could use it against you. Your boss might want to manipulate you into working for less money for more hours. Your mother might manipulate you into being too afraid to move away so that she is never lonely. Your very own lover, the person you share a bed with at night, could be the same person that's manipulating you and planting negative thoughts in your life. If you're not aware of manipulation, you could become really fearful of other people. Once you have been enlightened to all the ways and others might have been controlling you, it's like a weight off your shoulders. You realize that you have nothing to fear, never did, and that most people are only hurting you because you hurt yourself. You don't have to experience this the rest of your life. There are some manipulators that might be doing it intentionally. Others have no idea that they are doing this. You might be able to help certain manipulators in your life, and they might be more willing to change than you think. Some people have become so deluded in their thoughts that they'll never be able to fully change who they are. Remember that it is never your job to change other people. You are only responsible for yourself, and no matter how hard you try, you can't force others to think or act differently if they aren't willing to do it themselves. In order to really protect yourself, you can recognize those that aren't most likely to be manipulative. The best way to avoid manipulation is to avoid any type of person who will try taking advantage of you altogether. For those that aren't always avoidable, there are still plenty of methods you can use to recognize what they are doing to overcome this, so you never have to worry about experiencing it again. Warning signs of manipulators. The best way to prevent yourself from becoming manipulated is to know the warning signs of what manipulators might look like in the first place. We all have things about us that can help lead others to get a sense of the person that we might truly be at our core. And manipulators are no exception. Unfortunately, there is no uniform that all manipulators will wear. Every single one is going to present themselves differently. And it's up to us to do our best to ensure that we aren't letting these people into our lives. Look at obvious signs of manipulation as well. These might be more natural with people not realizing that they are doing it. It is the subtle and hidden manipulation that can be a bit scarier because it might have taken more planning on their part. Making statements such as, "You should do this," with authority is an obvious sign they're trying to control you. They might also obviously talk with a really loud tone and try to control the room just with the power of their voice. Oppositely, they might keep their arms crossed and stay quiet in the corner of a room where everyone else is having fun. By doing this, we are not condoning that you go out and try to scam every person you know. These tactics should be used sparingly and only when you really need them. They can be used responsibly to help yourself get out of a bad situation or relationship. They can be used responsibly when you are in dire need of help but have no one willing to lend a hand. They can be used responsibly by remembering always that the subjects you manipulate are people as well. Take responsibility for your actions. Even if you are realizing now that you have or are being manipulated, don't wallow in regret. Don't feel sorry or bad about yourself. Realize that everyone has been manipulated at least once in their lives. The important thing is that you realize it now and can now take steps towards shedding the role of the victim. When you remain in the victim mentality, thinking that you are so dumb for letting someone manipulate you or that you will only repeat these mistakes, you remain an easy target. Stepping out of the victim role and into the role of the manipulator is your first step in solidifying your identity and steeling yourself mentally. Own up to how you have been used in the past and move on from it. Just because it happened once or twice, or 3, or even hundreds of times, does not mean that it has to keep happening. Start thinking of yourself as a manipulator every day. Distance yourself from victim thinking and take control. Look at yourself in the mirror every day and say to your reflection, "I am in control." It may feel silly at first, but is an effective way to program yourself out of victim thinking. So let's look at some ways to achieve a grounded mind. Meditation. Meditation is a practice of clearing your mind and focusing on your breathing. This is very difficult to do at first, but the more you practice it, the better you will get at it and the more you will benefit from it. Try finding a quiet little spot where you can sit down on the ground or lay. This should be somewhere you will not be disturbed. Start with just 20 minutes a day in which you come to rest in this place. Close your eyes, try to clear your mind, and focus only on your breathing pattern. Focus solely on maintaining a uniform breathing pattern. When you feel more comfortable doing this for 20 minutes, increase it to 10 more minutes and on in that fashion. Being amongst nature. There is a Buddhist parable called the Sermon of the Inanimate. In this parable, a practitioner sat quietly in the forest and observed the nature around him. The trees, the grass, the rocks, etc. He found that inanimate nature, by merit of being still, has a lot to teach us. Being amongst nature is a good way to find your mental grounding. It doesn't have to be a forest. It could be a small park in your neighborhood. Just as long as you are more or less surrounded by natural things. Spend time here regularly, and you will come to find that the needs and concerns of society are not the same as the needs and concerns of nature. The trees are not stressed about work. The rocks don't care about material matters like cars and clothes. Unfortunately, we cannot be in this state of very tranquility all the time, but finding your own nature refuge can go a long way towards recentering and refocusing on what is important and real in your life. Take night walks. Ever notice that when you walk, you think a bit clearer? Maybe you have taken a walk with someone and found that you have more to talk about while walking. There is a reason for that. When our bodies are active, our blood is flowing more, which means more blood flow to the brain. Try taking a walk at night when you know there won't be a lot of cars or other people on the street. Think about your day and your interactions. Evaluate them beyond the surface encounters and compare them to what you believe and feel. This just might help you get to the hearts of various matters better and realize where your grounding lies. Practice improving your frame control. Mental grounding helps a lot in maintaining your frame because your frame is what you truly believe to be true and what you care about in life. You cannot maintain your frame without first finding your mental grounding. That is why it is important to practice grounding as often as possible. When you constantly remind yourself of your beliefs, it will be that much easier to maintain your frame. A strong frame is all about not wavering under criticism and pressure. You'll be challenged a lot, especially when you are using any of the tactics you have learned about in this book. Under this pressure, you must be confident that what you believe is right and true. You can use any of the tips we have discussed for increasing charisma and confidence, like standing, sitting up straight, speaking deliberately, and maintaining intent eye contact. Increasing your level of confidence will help you build a strong self-frame. Use these techniques and practices with patience, perseverance, care, and awareness. Remember always that having a strong mind is the first step toward being able to sway anybody. Know that the only way to protect yourself from other manipulators is to have a strong mind. Keep in touch with your sense of self at all times. If you do all of these things and take to heart all the techniques and tactics that you have learned in this book, you will find a definition of success in psychological wisdom and understanding. The goal of this book is to keep you out on the lookout for the dark manipulators who may show up in your life. When you know some of the signs to watch out for, and you understand dark psychology, you can protect yourself and stay safe. You are the one who should be in control of your own mind